here. Amen. Thank God for presence with us here this morning. If you will, drop anchor with me in the Gospel of John, chapter 4. Gospel of John, chapter 4. To read 4 verses in your hearing this morning, verses 13 through 15 and verse 29. John chapter 4. The text reads on this wise: Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. Verse 29, Come see a man which told me all things that I did. Is not this the Christ? We stop there in the reading God's word. He is blessed. You may be seated in his presence. For a few moments, I want to talk about the woman, the water, the witness. The woman, the water, the witness. Would you take the time to do an analysis of this 4th chapter of the Gospel of John? In its Genesis, you will discover that this is a time of transition within the bounds of the ministry of the Master. His ministry originated in Judea. And now Jesus was shifting his geographical location from Judea north to Galilee. The reason Jesus was shifting and transitioning his ministry is that the religious leaders were in the process of causing confusion as it relates to the ministry of John the Baptizer and Jesus the Christ. The issue was an issue related to the concept of baptism. Because Jesus never wanted to be embroiled and caught up in controversy, because if Jesus had engaged in controversy, it would have diminished his ministry to the masses. Jesus separates himself and moves from the region of Judea, and he begins to shift his ministry into the region of Galilee. You take note of the fact, my brothers and sisters, that there were at least 3 routes that the Master could have taken to get from Judea north to Galilee. First, he could have traveled by the seacoast that would have taken him north to Galilee. Secondly, he could have traversed across the Jordan River in order to get north to Galilee. But the text helps us to understand, brothers and sisters, that Jesus travels through a region called Samaria. The text is clear because the text tells us that Jesus must need go through Samaria. It's important for us to analyze the text and to grasp this idea because Jesus had an appointment in Samaria. He had an appointment with a woman at the well at the early evening hour at 6 o'clock in the evening. Jesus had an appointment with this ill-reputed woman at the well. Brothers and sisters, when you do an analysis of this whole text and concept, you take note of something. Jesus, being Jewish rabbi, have an encounter with a Samaritan woman at the well. You need to take note, my brothers and sisters, that the Samaritans came about during the captivity of the nation of Israel in 727 BC by the Assyrians, who took them captive. Because of this time of captivity, God's people had engaged in intermingling and intermarrying with those Gentile Assyrians. Because of this, the Samaritans were born. The Samaritans racially were half Jew and half Gentile. Because of this, my brothers and sisters, when we talk about racial classes and racial profiling and racial disparity, you take note in the constructs of this text that we can see the outline of this whole issue that racism is nothing new. It was going on in Jesus' day, where there were those groups who sidestepped other groups. The reason for this is, number one, God had said to his people that I want you to keep yourself separate and distinct from every other group of people. Now, it's not that God is a racist, but God is a preserver. God was trying to preserve the purity of his people because they had an assignment. And their assignment was to espouse him to the world. So he says, you know, don't intermingle with these other groups because they worship other gods. And so, you know, that was his rationale behind it. But there was an intermingling, and so the Samaritans came along. And because of this, a true Jew had no dealings with Samaritans. They despised them. They rejected them. They looked at them as less than they were, to a point where that if a Jew thought that a Samaritan was on his way to glory, they would actually suggest that God ought to turn them around and send them to hell. They despised the Samaritans so much so that they did not want to keep company with them at all. And so for Jesus, this Jew, to end up in Samaria was an unlikely place, engaging in an unlikely meeting, engaging in a conversation with an unlikely person. Because, brothers and sisters, you take note to the fact that in the public arena that no rabbi would engage in conversation with a female. So this was an unusual meeting between Jesus and this woman. But my brothers and sisters, Jesus was on a divine timetable. He was on a divine schedule. This wasn't happenstance or accidental. This was divinely purposed that Jesus would meet this woman at the well at 6 o'clock in the evening. Now I know I'm right because check this out. If you were to check out chapter number 3, he had a night session with a godly Pharisee named Nicodemus. And they discussed issues of the new birth, regeneration, and you know, Nicodemus represented a person who had a relationship with God but did not have true knowledge of God. But check it out. This woman, the text, if you've ever read it and studied the text, doesn't give the true indication that this woman really knew who God was. That this woman was a woman of ill repute, despised and rejected within her own context of her community. But check it out, y'all. It doesn't matter how bad we have been, that when you have an appointment with Jesus, it makes all of the difference in the world. Check it out, y'all. It's in the text, y'all. It was at Jacob's well. Jacob's well was a parcel of land that was given to Jacob's son Joseph. And this was a parcel of land that was part of the promise of God. And this was at the well that this woman would come at the 6 o'clock hour to draw water. Now, according to the custom, this was the time that the women would come to draw water, to take care of their evening chores, and prepare the meals, and all of those kinds of things at the 6 o'clock hour. But the text tells us that this woman comes to the well alone. There's nobody with her. She comes to the well alone. That tells you of her reputation within the community. You know, she did not have a good rapport with the other women in the community. And as you look at the text and we investigate the text, you'll understand why within the constructs of the text. The other women despised her. They didn't want to have any dealings with her. So she didn't have any company coming to the well. She was all by herself. But this was by divine design, because her and Jesus had an appointment at the well. Jesus didn't need a crowd, didn't need no spectators. He just wanted to talk to her all by herself. Now, I parked there and parenthetically just raised this point that you ought to have some time with just you and Jesus alone. You ought not be so busy and hurried in life that you don't never stop to take some time just to hang out with you and Jesus alone. You need to hang out with him by yourself sometimes, my brothers and sisters. You're going through so much just trying to make it from day to day. Daily challenges, sometimes debilitating. They're sometimes to the point where they even cause us to have mind issues. And so we need to spend some time with the Lord. There are too many folk in the Lord's house suffering from depression and going through all kind of mood swings and bipolar personalities and sometimes even schizophrenic activity. And so we need to spend some time with the Lord. If you really want some peace in your spirit, you're not going to get it based upon your own intellect, your own thought life. But you need to spend some quality private time with just you and the Lord. Let me tell you, he's always listening. His ear is always attentive to our cries. Am I right about it? But you got to talk to him, y'all, and you got to expect him to respond in the conversation. We can't act with this humdrum and mundane mentality. Even when we come into the house of God, we get up early in the morning and we come to the Lord's house, and we don't seem to have the gusto and the energy and the enthusiasm that we ought to have as worshipers of God. But check it out, y'all. He'll meet you right where you are. The text is showing us that. Number one, he meets this woman right where she was. Check out the conversation between Jesus and this woman. Jesus was weary. It reminds us of his humanity, even though John's gospel really bespeaks the divinity of Jesus, because he identifies him in chapter number 1 as being the Logos, the Word of God. And the word Logos in the Greek really does suggest in one aspect that which was a thought in the mind of God. That doesn't mean Jesus was created. What it suggests is that God already had in mind our redemption. And so the person that would carry out the will of God to bring about the redemption of God's people would be Jesus. So he was in the mind of the Father from a redemptive perspective. But John also humanizes him, because the text says he was weary from his journey. Now remember, Jesus walked everywhere he went. He did not have a car outside to take him from place to place. He didn't even ride a donkey or a horse. He walked from place to place. The text says Jesus was weary, and thus he stops and he sits on the well. The woman comes to draw the water. Jesus engages her and says, "Give me to drink." Check out the dialogue. The disciples were gone. It was just Jesus and the woman. The disciples had gone to another town to buy vegetables for their evening meal, so it was just Jesus and the woman. Then the woman of Samaria said unto him, "Number one, you being a Jew, how is it that you ask me, a Samaritan, to give you a drink of water?" Remember the racial prejudice. They had no dealings with one another. But check it out. Number one, Jesus needed to stir her interest and curiosity. But check it out. Jesus says to her, "If you knew." Yeah, if you knew who I was. The gift in the Greek means the gracious aspect of the gift that God gives. If you understood the gloria that God has given, if you knew who you were talking to, if you really understood who I was, He says, check it out. He says, I wouldn't be asking you for a drink of water, but it'd be a vice versa thing. You'd be asking me to give you some water to drink. But he says, I'm not just going to give you water. He says, I'm going to give you living water. Praise his holy name. You got to understand the distinction here, my brothers and sisters, because he had a blessing for her. Yeah, he had a blessing for her. He says, now I want to give you some living water. But check it out. She still couldn't grasp, she could not grasp what the master